Shalom, Ka'ala Yahweh, Ba'Shem Yahushai, Ba'Shem Rakabradash. Double honors to my teachers, the apostles and elders of the great millstone. Peace and mercy to the elect, who are the house of David reborn again in this generation. And Shalom to the 130 Yasharallah, who today are known as the Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, who before losing our true heritage, we were known as, and still are, the true Hebrew Israelites of the Holy Bible. In today's lesson, we're going to go into the downfall of the northern kingdom of Israel, who today we would be known as the Latinos and Native Americans. And in this time in the Bible, you have to go into the time back in 722 BC. This is when the Assyrian Empire, right, which was like the largest, most powerful empire at the time, decided to come up against the northern kingdom of Israel. And it wasn't only just us, but it was basically a bunch of different nations that the Assyrians started conquering, right? And the first time when they tried to come up against the northern kingdom, you could read about it in the book of Judith, which is found in the Apocrypha. When the Assyrians first came to us, their main general, Heliophanes, basically met an abrupt end at the hands of an Israelite woman named Judith. Right? She was a Simonite, what you would know today as a Dominican Republican. Okay, now when she ultimately took care of Heliophanes, they gave us the northern kingdom a few more years, but ultimately the prophecies of the Lord had to play out, right? And why is that? Well, because it tells you here, it says, Israel's punishment for idol worship, which will lead them to be known as the Latinos and the Native Indians at the end of their punishment, right? Because again, you gotta remember, us Latinos and Native Americans, the northern kingdom, we were gonna go into captivity before the southern kingdom, and also we were going to lose our heritage ultimately before the southern kingdom, right? Let's go and read this. This is 2 Kings 17-23. Until Yahweh Ba'Shem Yahushai removed Israel out of his sight, as he had said by all his servants the prophets, so was Israel carried away out of their own land to Assyria until this day. And we're going to actually hear about this in the book of Flavius Josephus, chapter 14, that talks about how Salmanasar took Samaria by force and how he transplanted the 10 tribes into Media, basically modern day Iran, and brought the nation of the Kuthains into their country.
Chapter 14. How Shalmaneser took Syria by force, and how he transplanted the 10 tribes into Media, and brought the nation of the Kuthians into their country in their room. When Shalmaneser, the king of Assyria, had it told him that Hoshea, the king of Israel, had sent privately to So, the king of Egypt, desiring his assistance against him, he was very angry, and made an expedition against Samaria, in the 7th year of the reign of Hoshea. But when he was not admitted into the city by the king, he besieged Samaria 3 years, and took it by force in the 9th year of the reign of Hoshea, and in the 7th year of Hezekiah, king of Jerusalem, and quite demolished the government of the Israelites, and transplanted all the people into Media and Persia, among whom he took King Hoshea alive. And when he had removed these people out of their land, he transplanted other nations out of Cutha, a place so called, for there is still a river of that name in Persia, into Samaria, and into the country of the Israelites. So the 10 tribes of the Israelites were removed out of Judea. 947 years after their forefathers were come out of the land of Egypt, and possessed themselves of the country. But 800 years after Joshua had been their leader, and as I have already observed, 240 years, 7 months, and 7 days after they had revolted from Rehoboam, the grandson of David, and had given the kingdom to Jeroboam. And such a conclusion overtook the Israelites when they had transgressed the laws, and would not hearken to the prophets, who foretold that this calamity would come upon them, if they would not leave off their evil doings. What gave birth to these evil doings was that sedition which they raised against Rehoboam, the grandson of David, when they set up Jeroboam his servant to be their king, when, by sinning against God, and bringing them to imitate his bad example, made God to be their enemy, while Jeroboam underwent that punishment which he justly deserved. And now the king of Assyria invaded all Syria and Phoenicia in a hostile manner. The name of this king is also set down in the archives of Tyre, for he made an expedition against Tyre in the reign of Elulius, and Menander attests to it, who, when he wrote his chronology, and translated the archives of Tyre into the Greek language, gives us the following history. One whose name was Elulius reigned 36 years. This king, upon the revolt of the Scythians, sailed to them and reduced them again to a submission. Against these did the king of Assyria send an army, and in a hostile manner overrun all Phoenicia, but soon made peace with them all, and returned back. But Sidon and Ace and Palsetyrus revolted, and many other cities there were which delivered themselves up to the king of Assyria. Accordingly, would not submit to him, the king returned, and fell upon them again, while the Phoenicians had furnished him with 60 ships, and 800 men to row them. And when the Tyrians had come upon them in 12 ships, and the enemy's ships were dispersed, they took 500 men prisoners, and the reputation of all the citizens of Tyre was thereby increased. But the king of Assyria returned, and placed guards at their rivers and aqueducts, who should hinder the Tyrians from drawing water. This continued for 5 years, and still the Tyrians bore the siege, and drank of the water they had out of the wells they dug. And this is what is written in the Tyrian archives concerning Shalmaneser, the king of Assyria. But now the Cuthians, who removed to Samaria, for that is the name they had been called by to this time, because they were brought out of the country called Cutha, which is a country of Persia, and there is a river of the same name in it. Them, according to their nations, which were in number 5, brought their own gods into Samaria, and by worshipping them, as was the custom of their own countries, they provoked Almighty God to be angry and displeased at them, for a plague seized upon them, by which they were destroyed. And when they found no cure for their miseries, they learned by the oracle that they ought to worship Almighty God, as the method for their deliverance. So they sent ambassadors to the king of Assyria, and desired him to send them some of those priests of the Israelites whom he had taken captive. And when he thereupon sent them, and the people were by them taught the laws, and the holy worship of God, they worshipped him in a respectful manner, and the plague ceased immediately. And indeed they continue to make use of the very same customs to this very time, and are called in the Hebrew tongue Cutlans, but in the Greek tongue Samaritans. And when they see the Jews in prosperity, they pretend that they are changed, and allied to them, and call them kinsmen, as though they were derived from Joseph, and had by that means an original alliance with them. But when they see them falling into a low condition, they say they are no way related to them, and that the Jews have no right to expect any kindness or marks of kindred from them, but they declare that they are sojourners, that come from other countries. But of these we shall have a more seasonable opportunity to discourse hereafter. End of Book 9, chapters 13 and 14. End of Book 9.
So as you could read there, or as you heard there, right, it gave the history how the northern kingdom was basically kicked out of the land of Israel, and how the Lord, he had made it so that way the king of Assyria basically implanted different nations, or a different nation in that land today, right, or in that land at that time, right, called the Kuthians, from the land of Kuth. Right, and And one thing, I don't know if you know caught that, but it said that after a while, these Kuthians, what they did is they would say that they were our kinspeople, right? Until things got bad, and then they would claim that they weren't, related to us, right? And again, these are the same people that when you read that about how Zerubbabel and Nehemiah were rebuilding the temple, these were the people who had came to ask to let them also take part in rebuilding the temple, but who Zerubbabel told them that they had nothing to do with the building of the temple, and ultimately these people hired agents to basically make rebuilding the temple impossible, and it came down to a point where Zerubbabel had to basically stop building the temple until the current king of Assyria at the time had passed away. Then the following ruler of Assyria then allowed Persia allowed the temple to be the rebuilding of the temple to continue, right? So these are those same people who've always basically been there, as the scriptures say, right? Dogs licking our wounds, right? And again, you have another example of these people who were in the land of the northern kingdom, in the story of the woman by the well, right, where the Messiah, whose true Hebrew name is Yahweh Shai, right, where he was basically playing with this woman, right? Because again, this woman, as you just heard at the end of this reading, that these people would claim to be our kinsmen. They would claim to be Israelites, but they weren't. And this is why Yahweh Shai was teasing the woman, talking about how she, that she knows not what she worships, but that we know what we worship, because salvation is of the Jews, meaning that salvation, the Bible, is only for the Israelites. It's not for anybody else who wants to try to join onto us, be it back in those days where you have the Kuthians pretending to be the Israelites, or in modern days today where you have the Ashkenazis or the Khazarians pretending to be Jews, right? It doesn't matter, right? You also got the religious Christians pretending that they are a part of the covenant, but they don't, right? Because again, it's not about what you believe in, it's where you come from, right? And ultimately, our people, because of all the captivities that they've gone through, we've lost this knowledge, right? We've lost understanding of who we are, right? This is ultimately was a curse put upon us, right? We can read about that in Jeremiah 17:4. It says, "And thou, even thyself, shalt discontinue from thine heritage that I gave thee, and I will cause thee to serve thine enemies in the land which thou knowest not. For ye have kindled a fire in my anger, which shall burn forever." And that's ultimately what happened, right? Us Israelites, when we went away from serving, King Solomon's son, Rehoboam, right? You can actually read about that. Let's go to the Bible timeline real quick, right? Because you got to remember, the nation of Israel, we were one people, right? In the time when King David and King Solomon ruled, you had both the Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans. We were one people, okay? But what happened is that ultimately, the Lord ripped the nations out of the hands of rulership from Judah, right? Because why? Because of what needed to happen, right? This is where you had the southern kingdom depart, and they continue to follow Rehoboam, which was the son of King Solomon, who was the grandson of King David. And you have the northern kingdom, the Latinos and Native Americans, right? We departed, and we basically went with Jeroboam, right? And Jeroboam, right, he was a Ephraimite, right? Or what you would know today as a so-called Puerto Rican, right? Well, what happened is we ultimately separated because the Lord put it on the spirit of Rehoboam to not listen to the elderly in his counsel, right? But instead he listened to the younger men who he had grown up with, and those men, basically advised him to make the servitude and the bondage, not the bondage, but the servitude and the labor of the northern kingdom to be even harsher than it was under King Solomon. So hence, the northern kingdom, we didn't want that, right? So we ultimately seceded, excuse me, and we basically put up our own king, over us, right? And we stopped following the southern kingdom. Now, this ultimately, like I said, was biblical prophecy, because when you go back, you had that prophet who had given to Jeroboam, I believe, he had given him 10 cloths, or he had ripped his garment, and he gave 10 pieces of that garment to Jeroboam, signifying that the house of Israel would be divided, and that only the southern kingdom, right? That would be the Judah and Benjamin, right? And Levi ultimately came, or was pushed out of the northern kingdom for the most part, and got sent down to the southern kingdom, right? So you had those three kingdoms, Judah, Benjamin, and Levi, who we know today as the Negro races, right? Those kingdoms were separated into the southern kingdom. Now, they were the more righteous kingdom, and they stayed in the land, but eventually they also got kicked out of the land. When you read a little bit further, right, their captivity came basically right after the northern kingdom was taken out, right? Ultimately came in 597 to about 10 years span, right, to 586, where they were taken away to Babylon, right? This is where the temple was destroyed, the Bible was burnt, and this can be read about in 2 Kings 25 and 21, right? You also hear about how Nebuchadnezzar, when he came, he killed the sons of Zedekiah, who was the last king of the southern kingdom, and he basically, after killing Zedekiah's sons in front of him, Nebuchadnezzar had Zedekiah's eyes basically put out, right? Meaning, those are the last things he got to see, which was, it's a horrible judgment, man. But again, this is ultimately what these people are gonna, these heathens who did this to us, they're gonna have to pay for all this, man. But again, let's read this real quick, because this is also another telling about how the northern kingdom, how we got pushed out. This is second Ezra 13 and 40. Those are the 10 tribes which were carried away prisoners out of their own land in the time of Hoshea, the king, who Salmanassar, the king of Assyria, led away captive, and he carried them over the waters, and so came they into another land. And at this point, we basically stayed in Assyria, right? The northern kingdom, that is. We stayed in Assyria for about 100 years, right? Of captivity and servitude, right? But then what happened is the Babylonians came and basically conquered Assyria. And at that point, we were, for the most part, free to go. Some of us went back to the land of Israel, which you could read about in the New Testament. You could hear about how there were people of different of the northern kingdom tribes amongst the disciples. And then also you have some of our people go into the other lands, right? Because you got to remember, during this time you had the Silk Road, which was a big trade route into the east, right, over into Asia and whatnot, right? During like that, you had that going on. So a lot of our people went east, and then but the majority of our people, like it tells you here, ultimately came over here to the Americas. This is 41. But they took this counsel amongst themselves that they would leave the multitude of the heathen and go forth into a further country where never mankind dwelt, and that they might there keep their statutes which they never kept in their own land. And they entered into the Euphrates by the narrow passages of the river. For the Most High then showed signs for them, and held still the floods till they were passed over. For through that country there was a great way to go, namely of a year and a half. And the same region is called Azareth. Azareth meaning unknown land, right? Because the Western Hemisphere, for the most part, was an unknown land to the greater world. Okay, if you look at maps during this time, there's only knowledge of the Eastern Hemisphere. Okay, 46. They then dwelt they there until the latter time, right? Meaning that Ezra, he's seeing that that the Northern Kingdom would stay in this land called Azareth, the Americas, until the end days, the latter time. And now, when they shall begin to come. And this right here is talking about when the Lord will ultimately bring the Southern Kingdom over here to join us in our exile, right? The Southern Kingdom came over here, by the way, on the North Atlantic slave trade, just to clarify it, right? But, remember, this ultimately is the journey and the historic path that us Israelites, we took. First the Northern Kingdom, and then the Southern Kingdom over here to the Americas, right? And again, this all had to happen for prophecy to play out. Because why? Because again, the Lord's will, needs to be done, for all things to play out accordingly, right? And what is that? For us to go into captivity, for us to serve our enemies, because we broke that covenant that we made when the Lord originally brought us Israelites, both the northern and the southern kingdom, out of the land of Egypt, right? But now that we're here in the latter times, we've now, for the most part, have fulfilled that punishment, and those curses that are put upon us are now starting to come off of us, right? We're starting to reawaken, to find out who we truly are as a people, right? We're coming back to the ways of our fathers, the ways of the Bible, and ultimately this truth is going out throughout the entire land to get to our people, the Negro, Latino, and Native Americans, because we are the original Israelites of the Holy Bible. We are the people that the Lord has chosen for leadership and for salvation in the next iteration of humanity once the Lord comes back and resets everything, right? So hopefully this video was edifying, Akim. Until next time, I want to give all honor and glory and praises to Yahweh, Bashem, Yahshai, Bashem, Rekal Gardash, Brakat Yahweh, Brakat Yahshai, Brakat Yahweh, Brakat Yahshai, Brakat Yahweh, Brakat Yahshai, Bahashem, Rekal Gardash. The water, Akim. Shalom.